was fast before he was wise. The wild man from South Africa, Jody Scheckter, was born on the 29th of January 1950 in East London and arrived in Europe at the turn of the 70s with a heavy right foot and an even heavier reputation from Formula Ford and Formula 3. Blindingly quick, utterly uncompromising, and just wild enough to make team managers nervous. It took a decade and some hard lessons for that raw speed to become a world title. But when it did, at Monza in 1979, the new Jody, measured, ruthless, and rarely in error, wrote himself into Ferrari folklore and into the record books as the only African to ever win the Formula One World Championship. After leaving South Africa for Britain in 1971, Scheckter ripped through the junior ladder the hard way. Formula Ford weekends won in bunches, lap records tumbling, then a step into Formula 3 with the same elbows out speed and a growing stack of results. The form earned him McLaren test miles and the odd F2 outing, and by the autumn of 1972 he'd driven and talked his way into a works chance at the US Grand Prix at Watkins Glen. He qualified strongly, ran inside the top 3 on merit, and finished 9th on his first World Championship Sunday, proof that the raw pace and the edge were real, and that if he could tidy up the roughness, he'd be formidable. 12 months later he was back with McLaren for a part-time season in the new M23 and quickly became a headline act for reasons both brilliant and bruising. In France he hustled the reigning champion Emerson Fittipaldi so hard that the pair clashed and tempers boiled over. At Silverstone a few weeks later, leading a snarling pack through Wadcote Corner on the opening lap, he ran wide, snapped across the circuit, and triggered one of the British Grand Prix's most infamous pile-ups. It stopped the race and destroyed a small fleet of race cars. The verdict from much of the paddock was blunt. Extraordinary talent, urgently needed some tempering. The tempering arrived at Tyrrell, the hardest school there was. In the wake of Jackie Stewart's retirement and Francois Sever's death, Ken Tyrrell gambled on the fast but raw South African as his 1974 spearhead. Under Uncle Ken, the edges were planned down without sanding off the spark. Tyrrell's message became a mantra, delivered in a tone that brooked no argument. You must finish, you must stop making mistakes. Scheckter absorbed it. That spring's induction turned into summer results. Anderstorp gave him his first Grand Prix win, a taut, controlled drive that looked nothing like a lucky break. Brands Hatch added a home soil victory for the team that had put his faith in him. The wild child who'd scattered debris at Silverstone entered 1974 as a legitimate title contender, third in the standings and suddenly a driver you could build a future around. He doubled down in 1975 with another landmark, victory at the South African Grand Prix at Kyalami. This wasn't the spectacular Scheckter of 1973, this was the finished article. Quick enough to sit on the front row, disciplined enough to run the car's limits, and no further calculating enough to make strategies and tyres last in the brutal high-wheel heat. He was leading teams now, not merely starring for them. And then came 1976 and the six-wheeler. Derek Gardner's Tyrrell P34 looked like a drawing board dag made metal. 4 tiny front wheels hitting the front wing's airflow, 2 standard rears doing the shoving. Whether you thought it was genius or gimmick, Scheckter did what matters most. He won with it. Again at Anderstorp, he led teammate Patrick Depailler home in a 1-2 that remains utterly unique. The only World Championship Grand Prix ever won by a 6-wheeled car. The rest of the season was a mixture of podiums and hard graft. The quirks of the concept often outpaced the rate at which Lotus and the ground effect revolution were rewriting the sport. But if the P34 divided opinions, Scheckter's authority did not. For 1977, he placed a bold bet on a brand new team, Walter Wolf Racing. On paper it was a start-up, on track it was an instant. He won the opening round in Argentina, Wolf's first F1 race, then Monaco with a display of precision that would age particularly well, and Canada for good measure. By season's end he was runner-up in the championship behind Niki Lauda. In a sport that eats experiments, Scheckter made the improbable look inevitable. The pendulum swung in 1978. The Wolf was less sweet, and ground effect had become an arms race. Lotus leapt ahead, and Schecter's year became one of damage limitation. Fewer wins, more podiums, still the same professional heft. The paddock knew the recipe by now. If you gave Jody a car that looked after its tyres and brakes, he looked after your championship. He learned how to be fast without being fragile, aggressive without being wasteful. Ferrari called, and when Maranello calls, you don't let it ring. In 1979 he walked through the gates to find the 312 T4. That suited him perfectly. It wasn't a qualifying monster, but it was beautifully consistent, rugged in a fight, and efficient over a race distance. His teammate was the incandescent Gilles Villeneuve, the most spectacular driver of his generation. The pairing could hardly have been more different, but it worked. Scheckter played the long game. Zolder was the statement, threading through attrition to win the Belgian Grand Prix. Monaco was the proof, a race that rewards patience and precision, a victory won by millimetres and disciplined throttle openings. Dijon that summer is remembered for Villeneuve's wheel-to-wheel battle with René Arnoux, but the arithmetic that mattered belonged to Scheckter. He was relentlessly tidy, minimising errors, turning Sundays into point hauls when others were chasing glory. Everything crystallised at Monza on the 9th of September 1979. Ferrari at home with a world title within reach. The Tifosi didn't so much breathe as roar. Scheckter hit the front and refused to blink. Villeneuve sat behind him, a scarlet shadow, quicker in sectors, impatient in spirit, but loyal indeed. With laps ebbing by, the Canadian had the car, and certainly the courage to try something on his teammate, but he didn't. Team orders were understood, the friendship was real, and the championship was the prize. Ferrari took a 1-2, Scheckter sealed the crown, and the champion's own verdict was tellingly understated. It was just a relief. It carried history with it, the first and still only African world champion, and Ferrari's last title for 21 long years. Then the sport turned hard. In 1980, the flat 12 Ferrari 312 T5 found itself aerodynamically outclassed as ground effect matured and rivals streaked past in the corners. Scheckter, still the reigning champion, discovered that perfect discipline cannot compensate for a flawed tool. The year bled points, just 2 in total, and in Montreal, ignominy arrived. He failed to qualify, the only reigning world champion ever to do so. For a man who had rebuilt himself on consistency and control, it was an unarguable sign. By Watkins Glen he had made up his decision. He climbed out of an uncompetitive red car, and at 30, walked away from Formula One on his own terms. He didn't need to come back to prove anything. The numbers already did that. 10 Grand Prix wins, 33 podiums, 3 times in the top 3 of the championship, victories for 4 different teams, and a singular honour of being the only driver to win a World Championship Grand Prix in a 6-wheel car. But the stats only describe the scaffolding. The real story is the arc. The transformation from a mercurial rough diamond into meticulous architect of a title campaign. The boy who once spun across Woodcote became the man other drivers could not dislodge from a winning line. And the second life was classic. Decisive, inventive, and successful. He decamped to the US and founded Firearms Training Systems in 1984, building sophisticated simulators that trained police and military around the world. He then returned to Britain and took on something far removed from pit lanes: soil. Laverstoke Park Farm in Hampshire became a laboratory for biodynamic and organic agriculture. He poured the same obsession for process and detail into fields and herds that he had once invested in aerodynamics and tyre management, building an award-winning brand and for a time turning out Britain's best buffalo mozzarella. It was the same mindset: pick a field, master the variables, execute relentlessly. The racer's bloodline continued. His son Thomas made his own way as an IndyCar winner. Different series, same appetite. Jody kept a hand in the sport as a commentator and occasional paddock presence, the hair greying, the opinion still sharp. He remained as candid as ever about the business he once conquered, unromantic about danger, clear-eyed about the choices he made, and generous about the talents of those he rated. He could be spiky in an interview, warm in private, and always professional in public. What makes the 79 title so memorable isn't only the trophy, but the method. He won it by being the most complete version of himself at exactly the right moment. He trusted the car he had rather than pining for the car he didn't. He read races for pressure rather than pyrotechnics. He harvested points when others indulged impulse. He led Ferrari like a foreman on a site that had to be finished on time. No drama, no waste, no corners cut. That was the difference between Jody who arrived and terrified people in 1973 and the Jody who quietly suffocated the World Championship 6 years later. Look at the images and you see the journey still in frames. The M23 crossed up at Woodcote, the Tyrrell P34 looking like a spaceship in profile, the Wolf with its clean lines and sharp nose, the 312 T4 hunkered over curves with its wide stance and tidy manners. At each stage there is the same driver, but a different man. The talent never changed, the judgment did. And in Formula One, judgment is what makes a difference when the tyres go off, the fuel load lightens, and the man in your mirrors believes he can force you into error. If you need one lesson from Jody Scheckter's career, take Ken Tyrrell's dictum, the one he drilled into his young charge until it stuck. You must finish, you must stop making mistakes. Scheckter took those words, turned them into a creed, and in doing so, forged a champion. That's why the wild child became Maranello's safe pair of hands. That's why a driver who once sent the British Grand Prix back to its starting blocks became the man, in scarlet, who closed the door on the rest of the world and refused to let it open again. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of the Racing Chronicles. We've got plenty more stories coming your way, so stay tuned for the next chapter in racing history. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.